Hey there, church. I'm recording this little devotional on Friday night right after my family watched The Passion of the Christ. And one thing I've been thinking about is if I was in that moment watching Jesus be crucified and I don't have the knowledge of the resurrection yet, what might I be feeling? Right? Because that's really what I've been presented with is trying to share about Saturday in the course of the Holy Week. Like, what would it have been like to be there on Saturday when you've experienced the death of Jesus, but you haven't experienced the resurrection of Jesus? One of the passages that comes to my mind, maybe because we are fasting right now as a church body, many of us, is in Luke 5, verse 35. Jesus taught, "But the time will come when the bridegroom will be taken from them. In those days they will fast." And really he's highlighting and what I experienced in watching the Passion and being reminded of all these details of what Christ was going through. And even more than just the physical suffering, you have the much more significant is the fact that the wrath of God is being poured out on Jesus, that God the Father is choosing to pour out all of his judgment and anger on his Son who didn't deserve it, his perfect one and only Son. Wrath is being poured out on. It's such a sad moment. It's such a dark time full of despair. And actually where my mind's been going and what I feel like the Lord's been leading me to is a passage in Luke 24. Again, there's not much in Scripture on what's going on Saturday between the death and resurrection of Jesus. But in Luke 24, we have this situation with two disciples, people who had been following Jesus. And we get to see a little bit of what they were going through and how they were processing through the death of Jesus without having conclusive proof of the resurrection of Jesus. So in Luke 24, verse 13, it reads, "Now that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. As they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them, but they were kept from recognizing him. So Jesus appears to them as they're walking away from Jerusalem. Jesus comes alongside of them, but they don't know it's him. He asks them, 'What are you discussing together as you walk along?' Right? As if Jesus doesn't know, right? But he's doing something in them here. 'What are you talking about?' So interesting to me, the next line is, 'They stood still, their faces downcast.'" Right? So these have been followers of Jesus. They had had so much hope in him, and they watched and stood by as he was murdered. And so here is this stranger coming up to them and asking, "What are you guys talking about?" And their response is just, like, no words. They got nothing. Can you imagine the despair? The worst injustice ever had just happened. The perfect Son of God, crucified, rejected by his own creation. It makes me think about like situations that maybe we've experienced where you've had a lot of hope only to have it be destroyed. There's been different moments in my life, whether it's situations I've been in. I remember in college, just like everything in my life falling apart, everything I had placed my hope in. I think about like a loved one of mine who still is kind of off, away from the Lord, and it just hurts. It hurts so much to have had so much hope and love in something, and then to have it destroyed, and to not see it come to fruition, the thing that you were hoping for. And many of you, I would imagine, have experienced such great hope that has been destroyed, that has created despair in your life. It could be a loss of a loved one. It could be broken marriage. It could be even in the middle of this current situation. Maybe you lost your job and you don't know where your next paycheck's coming from. But I think we can identify with the fact that there is something about having great hope and having it destroyed that hurts almost far, not almost, but it hurts far more than if you never had hope to begin with, right? And that's where I think we're going to see these two disciples have gone down this road of hopelessness and despair. And it's so amazing to see how Jesus meets them here. And so, continuing on in verse 18, one of them named Cleopas asked him, "Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days?" Right? Are you kidding me? Like, you don't know what's going on? You're the one person in Jerusalem that doesn't know? And Jesus responds, "What things?" Right? And again, of course, he knows, but he's trying to pull something out of them. He's doing a work in them. "About Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people." Now, let's stop for a second. Did you notice that? These guys were, and we'll see in later verses, they've been rolling with the 11 apostles. Like, they've been in this thing. And here they are calling Jesus a prophet? Are you kidding me? Not Messiah, not Son of God, not Son of David, not King of the Jews, none of those things. They call him a prophet. Now, that's true. He is a prophet, but he is far more than that. And these guys know better. I am just about positive. They knew Jesus was more than that. But it almost seems like they're kind of walking things back a little bit, right? So Jesus is crucified, and now they're questioning everything. Maybe we were wrong about this thing. Maybe he's not the Messiah. Maybe he's not who we thought he was. In light of these circumstances, it seems like they're really starting to question who Jesus actually is and what he's capable of. Maybe he's just a prophet. Well, that's a safe thing to say right here. Verse 20, "The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel." Now catch that, right? Maybe you felt like I was being unfair with that whole prophet thing, but here you can start to see pretty clearly in verse 21, these guys are walking this thing back big time. But we had hoped that he was going to redeem Israel. Had hope, past tense. We previously hoped that Jesus was going to save us. Implying strongly, we don't anymore. It really causes you to step back and go, wait a minute, why are these guys even going away from Jerusalem? Why is it that they are going to Emmaus? What is going on here? Are these people like ditching out? Because the 11 are still back there in Jerusalem, and many of the other disciples, especially, let me keep reading a little bit more. "And what is more, it is the third day since all this took place. In addition, some of our women amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning, but didn't find his body. They came and told us that they had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see Jesus." So here it is. They're saying, look, I mean, it's been 2 days since Jesus died. And more than that, some of the women had a vision from angels saying that Jesus rose from the dead. What the heck are they doing going to Emmaus? What are they thinking? Well, it seems like they're ditching. They've lost hope. Literally, right? They say, we had hoped. They're pressing in on despair. They're sitting in hopelessness. They're looking at the circumstances that have played out in front of them and going, hope is gone. continuing to go forward, Jesus rebukes them. He explains the scriptures, and he explains specifically why the Messiah had to suffer. Right? This is Jesus communicating to them, look, this had to happen. This is part of the plan. This was all part of it. You read Isaiah 52 and 53, you see the suffering, and that's not what Jesus said specifically. I mean, I think probably he went to Isaiah 52 and 53, like, this is what the suffering servant, this is the Messiah, what he was going to come and do. He was going to suffer on our behalf and take our iniquity. This had to happen. And then Jesus, he reveals himself to them. And then they go back to Jerusalem and they report to the 11, and they clearly have this totally different countenance. Jesus has opened their eyes to the scriptures. He has opened their eyes to who he is, that he is alive, and hope is restored. And this is what the resurrection ultimately does. I mean, so many different aspects to the resurrection, but it restores hope in the middle of despair. The resurrection is absolutely essential to our salvation, and it does so many different things. And one of the most significant things that it does is it is this constant reminder of hope, hope, hope in the middle of what could feel like hopeless situations. Because God is faithful. And that's also what I'm noticing here too with this situation, is that why does Jesus appear to these two before he does the rest of the disciples? These are the guys that it seems best we can tell are walking out. Our God is so gracious to come and meet us in those moments that feel the darkest. And I think a lot of us have experienced that, where you've seen these moments of darkness and despair and hopelessness, where God works in such a uniquely beautiful way that sustains us and gets us through. And sometimes it feels like it's at the last hour. But regardless, he comes. He shows up and he meets us in those moments. The last thing I want to highlight is a passage in Luke 23. I got brought to my attention by actually Pura's devotional this morning, and I just never had noticed this before. But Luke 23, verse 35, it says, "The people stood watching, and the rulers even sneered at him. They said, 'He saved others. Let him save himself if he is God's Messiah, the chosen one.' The soldiers also came up and mocked him. They offered him wine vinegar and said, 'If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself.' There was a written notice above him which read, 'This is the king of the Jews.' One of the criminals who hung there hurled insults at him. 'Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and us.' But the other criminal rebuked him. 'Don't you fear God?' he said. 'Since you are under the same sentence, we are punished justly, for we are getting what our deeds deserve, but this man has done nothing.'" And then check out this statement. I mean, we're familiar with it, but I never noticed how crazy this statement is. He looks at Jesus and says, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." Now, why is this a crazy statement? It's because he's looking at a bloodied man right next to him with a crown of thorns, just torn up and on his last breaths. And he looks at this guy and says, "Hey, when you're king of your kingdom, remember me." That's insane. For him to have that level of faith in the middle of the darkest moment of his life, deep despair, hopelessness, all of a sudden he is filled with this impossible faith to look at Jesus and go, even though I see you're dying and that you've been totally beaten up, I believe that you are about to enter your kingdom and that you have the power to save me. That's my encouragement for us, church, is to have that sort of posture where when we're in moments of where we just don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. Like we don't see the way out. We don't see how this thing's going to get better. We don't see how God's going to deliver us. We don't see his faithfulness in that moment. That we would put our trust in God, that he is our salvation, that we look to him. Lord, deliver us, save us, help us. I think that's what Saturday is about, right? You've got knowledge of his death and you're feeling the despair, and maybe you aren't seeing the resurrection yet. Maybe you aren't seeing salvation yet. Maybe you aren't seeing the circumstances change in a way that definitively show us that God has come through. But in our Saturdays, in our despairs, we can know and have confidence that God is faithful and he is good and he will meet us in those moments, and we only need to look to him. And so I guess regardless of what circumstance you're going through right now and all of this craziness, to look to him, your salvation, your hope. Don't despair. Don't give in to hopelessness. Sometimes it's easier to go that route. It's so easy to give into that, right? Because it hurts so much to hope and then have it destroyed. Let's continue to hope in God. Let's continue to look into him. He is our salvation. He is good. He is faithful. He will meet us in those moments. Thank you, church.